Okay, part two. Hey, everybody, we are back on, and hopefully everything's going to go smoother this time, and hopefully you can hear me. If you can hear me, let me know in the comments. And if you can't, let me know in the comments. Thanks you, Maxwell, for bringing that to my attention before. So we're going to just, it's a little bit more of the handheld approach today. So where were we? We were talking about zoos, and actually before we get too far in, because people might not watch part one, they might only see part two. Let's start over real quick and recap where we were. Zoos employ what are called DART teams, which are dangerous animal response teams. Now, these teams are armed, and there are guns placed all around the zoo. And the idea is that zookeepers are trained as marksmen, although not very accurate marksmen. They are trained as marksmen. And the very zookeeper that raises an animal may have to shoot it in an unfortunate event. What does that mean even? Anyway, I know we had played it before. Let me check our comments here. Hey, Stacy, good morning. Nice to see you here today. Thank you so much for being here with us. There you go. And let's see. All right. So I wanted to, before we get too far in, I wanted to share the clip again from the movie about the DART team. And then let's talk about the DART team, why it exists, what we can learn from the fact that it exists, and what we can learn from the previous DART encounters. And let's talk about safety. We were talking about a place where you're going to advertise to children. You're going to advertise to parents. Bring your children down. There are, again, as we always say, there are no commercials for adults going and hanging out at the zoo together. It is purely for children. I mean, I know adults like zoos also on their own, but they're not advertised. They're advertised as daycares. They're advertised as daycares for parents to go get their kids interested in something for an hour or two, and that's it. Now, that's the spectator side. Wow, we just saw this amazing world of animals. Now, you take the most vulnerable of people, children, you place them in a place with the most dangerous animals in the world. And the only way you can control it is through a bullet. Is this what we think is education? Is this how we're educating children on the environment? Anyway, let's take a look at this clip again, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about DART team.
Harambe was shot by the DART team. The Dangerous Animal Response Team are trained sharpshooters on the zoo staff, with an arsenal of weapons stashed throughout the zoo in case of emergency.
The DART team, I didn't know existed until after Harambe's death. It was a shock to me. The DART team had guns placed around the zoo. I did not like hearing that. When I found out, oh, I've been wandering around that place, and where were those guns hidden? I didn't know they were available.
Just think of that moment. If the child had just moved a fraction at that moment, the bullet could have gone through the child as well. It's not exactly a risk-free option to have a marksman take out a silverback who's holding a child.
This Remington 870 shotgun is similar to what the team uses. The goal is to always stop the threat. In this case, the zoo decided the 400-pound male gorilla was the threat and the boy was in a life-threatening situation. It's a choice that's still sparking outrage, sadness, and concern.
It is the short-sighted, cheap choice. Kill it. Don't try and deal with the situation in a dimensioned way. Get a gun and kill it.
If the only way to stop an unwanted animal-human interaction is to kill the animal, should endangered animals ever be on display?
And I think that question holds true to all animals. If the only way to interact is by killing it, should we even have this situation in the beginning? So I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I know that guns in general are a very divided topic, but what we're talking about here today is having a stash of guns all around the zoo in a place where there are a lot of children. Is this a good idea? is this a good idea? I'm really curious what everybody has to say about this. So one thing about the DART team is that they are not mandatory by the AZA, the American Zoological Association, does not require them. It's up to the zoo. So the zoo has to decide, okay, if something goes wrong, what do we do? Now, in the incident in Harambe, what happened was a child was able to get through a gate that was about the height of a baby gate. That gate was inadequate, found later to be inadequate, and the zoo is fully responsible for the child falling in. So then what does the zoo do? A lot of people ask, can they tranquilize them? Tranquilizer takes a lot of time to kick in, and it actually ramps up the system before the system collapses. So tranquilizers are not, a lot of people do ask about that. Could they have tranquilized Harambe? The answer is, unfortunately, no. It would have been way too dangerous of an interaction. The only way this would have been avoided is if Harambe would have been alive in the wild. So now let's talk a little bit about the DART team itself. The DART team itself is trained and is certified by the Sheriff's Department. Now, the particular zoo, the Cincinnati Zoo, this team, I believe they have about 14 members. And what they do is they keep it anonymous. It's a secret who the DART team members are, because everybody wants to be a zookeeper, but you wouldn't want to know who had to shoot your favorite animal at the zoo. So again, why do we have a situation, and especially when I believe this goes for all animals, but when we talk about endangered animals, we're talking about animals who have a limited number on Earth. The breeding programs in zoos do nothing to help animals in the wild. They are absolutely meant to stock up the zoos again. They have nothing to do with helping animals in the wild. So there's no conservation issues there. They're not helping gorillas survive. They're just helping more sales in their ticket sales. So why would you have an animal that is already close to extinction? You're breeding them for public consumption, but if something goes wrong, you're going to kill it and remove one of the very few that are left on Earth? Again, I don't think this is a very smart idea for the planet or for businesses. It sounds to me, and this is true, I mean, think about this. We have a sliding scale of morality that changes over time. Human zoos used to be acceptable internationally. That is how little regard we gave our other human brothers and sisters on this planet. Now, animals are generally used for exploitative purposes in modern society. Economy and animals generally involve exploitation, whether it's animal ag, whether it's entertainment, and it doesn't matter. No matter what, they are being used in one form or another. And oh, you know what? Actually, hold on one sec. Stacy has a great message here. All the more reason wild animals don't belong in zoos. This is what we're talking about right here. The decision makers are fully aware they cannot guarantee the safety of their animals from people, and their quick fix is to just shoot and kill the animal. Nobody wins. Imagine the psychological damage to the zookeeper who spent their entire life loving animals, trying to go to school, trying to get a job. It's very competitive. Being a gorilla keeper, a zookeeper, is one of the most competitive jobs out there. These people live to save these animals, to see them happy and to see them well in their well-being. So when we're talking about this, I don't want anybody to think that the zookeepers, we're talking about them. We're talking about the zoo decision makers. Do we need a gorilla in the middle of Cincinnati? Somebody said in our last Q&A, shouldn't we just revamp our expectations a little bit, that we can't see a rhino in the middle of Cincinnati? We can't see a gorilla in the middle of Cincinnati. These are animals that have a special place in the world. And, yesterday we talked about how important they are within the biodiversity of their natural place. Today, we're talking about the fact that they are raised in a little box. And if they get out of line or do something that may be in their instinct, like escape, it's not just interactions, it's escapes. There are bears that have tried to escape. There are lions that have tried to escape. Recently, there was a horrible event in England where a horse escaped, and recently an elephant escaped from a circus. It is natural for animals to hate captivity and try to escape. This fantasy that somehow they have this great life needs to be removed from our public consciousness. We have to understand they are suffering psychosis. They are suffering mental and physical damage all the time in these environments. Being trained to perform something is not a life of freedom or sentience, and especially for a sentient being. Now, again, we bring any animal, but we bring in an endangered animal into a mix where they're being bred for tickets and not to save the environment, not to save their population numbers, and being killed and managed in that way. It just it's very difficult to see the use of it. So I'm really curious, how many parents are out there watching this right now that are comfortable with the fact that when they take their children to the zoo, the barriers might not be adequate, and the children might be subject to gunshots? Everybody really has, well, maybe not, but it would seem that, people should understand that guns and children should never mix. Although, we're having a problem with our school shootings here in America. So we're still way behind being able to know how to be responsible gun culture. But when you take it into a microcosm like a zoo, then you're talking about a very small amount. Now, one thing I'd like to point out about the DART members is, as great as they are at what they do, and as hard as they work to train to try to do the common good that they feel, I should say, is the common good, which would be neutralizing any threat from an animal. We have to remember that when they get certified, they only have to have about a 70 to 80% success rate in their marksmanship. Now, if your child is standing in front of a gorilla and they are shooting the gorilla, like Ian said, if that child were to move a little bit, now you're talking about a 3-year-old, they're not known for, sitting still. If that child moved a little bit, he could have equally have caught the bullet. So when you have marksmen that have a 70 to 80% success rate, and you have moving targets and you have dangerous situations, the guns aren't the solution. The solution is we no longer should be interacting dangerous animals, endangered animals with children and moms in the middle of cities. It's an antiquated idea that I think we have to stop. Anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for joining today and talking about it. It's a very difficult topic because, there's always the fine line of, and everyone has a different opinion on this. Are hunters conservationists? A lot of the DART teams are hunters. So there's a lot to be said on both sides, and I'd love to see this conversation continue even after the video ends. I apologize for earlier not being able to get the microphone. We'll have to find out what's going on, get that fixed for tomorrow's broadcast. But today I wanted to talk about the zoo DART team. The zoos have DART teams. They have guns all around. And you got to remember, too, there's elementary schools taking entire field trips over there. Now, that child that fell into Harambe's enclosure, we can't even imagine the psychological damage he's going to have watching a gorilla's head explode in front of him, whether he can remember that or not. It is gory, and it is somewhat of a, in my mind, at least, violence always plays out in a fantasy that people have in a story they write. And the reality is always very different, and nothing good comes from it, ever. Sierra says, and by the way, everybody, this is Sierra Williams, producer of Harambe, my production partner, my life partner, best partner in the world, and somebody who is, equally as devoted to fighting for the rights of all animals and all people. We just, how hard can it be for us to achieve that? We've made it to the moon. Can't we just look at each other all in an equal moral imperative, ethically, as equals? It's an interesting question, one we're going to be bringing up live too as well. What about the moral, ethical implications of speciesism? And how does that play into zoos finances. But to go back, sorry, I got all sidetracked. To go back to Sierra's comment, when I used to go with my family to the zoo, I expected a high level of safety. I never thought I would be in danger, even in the presence of wild animals. Great point. There is an expectation, I would imagine, especially when parents are looking at commercials on TV, and they're like, bring your kids to the zoo. They would have to expect that the zoo would be safe. As a matter of fact, when we were there working on the movie, we saw children standing on the fences. We saw children running with no parents because parents have an expected level of security. And at the zoo, it's a very high standard. And a lot of parents don't watch their kids at the zoo. Who's responsible for what happened to Harambe? That's another chat we'll come up with later. I say it was the zoo and the DART team member. They're the ones that killed Harambe. Again, very, very complicated. As Stacey says, topic for another day, but the parents, caregivers bear responsibility for the actions of their children, not just in Harambe's, but all instances. And that actually is a very, very important comment and something that definitely, Stacey, we want to unpack because we want to talk about who is responsible on our next live. Elizabeth says there are way too many possibilities for a bad outcome in a situation like that. Putting the world's most dangerous animals and the most vulnerable populations on Earth together definitely seems like an invitation for trouble. Sierra says, in the very same exhibit where the incident occurred. Oh, yeah, sorry. She says, we saw parents physically putting their child on top of the new barrier so they could see better in the very same exhibit where the incident occurred. We witnessed it. Parents are absolutely irresponsible at the zoo. And I know parents are not going to be happy we say this, but you all let your guard down, and we've seen it almost everywhere that we've been dealing with captivity. So the zoos fool parents into thinking there is an element of safety. Meanwhile, there's just guns strapped all around. Parents are expecting like a modern, futuristic safety that, is this amazing, clean, safe place for children, and they're actually getting like, the shootout at the OK Corral. Elizabeth says, we are trained to look at the zoo as a playground. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, there's never, it's very rare that you'll see a commercial showing, a road trip to the zoo with some people. And yes, Sarah agrees. Exactly. So very interesting. Question to everybody. Do you think that endangered animals, especially, let's just stick with endangered animals at the moment. And again, I believe it applies to a wider variety, but let's just say, do you think an endangered animal should be bred to be kept in captivity without being released back into the wild population, not helping the wild population? But do you think an endangered animal already near extinction as it is something that should be available to be killed? Should we do that? Is it somewhat on par with canned hunting in the sense that it's a shooting gallery and the outcome is one less endangered animal and a bunch of traumatized people? I'm sure that the zookeeper is traumatized. Can you imagine being that zookeeper? I mean, what damage it inflicts on them? Can you imagine the sound of the gunfire to all the animals in the zoo? Just imagine the sound of the gunfire for all the people that had to move away from the exhibit, but the zoo wasn't closed down. Think about all the screaming. Think about all the mayhem. Think about all of the psychological damage inflicted on the child, the mother, the zookeeper, and everybody else. It's a terrible incident. We don't want to make light of it in any way, and we want to use it as an example to say, if this is what a zoo requires, should a zoo continue the way it is? Or is it just simply way too dangerous and antiquated of a concept? Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear your thoughts on the DART team. Do you think they did the right thing by that day? That day, it's very difficult to second guess it, but I'd love to hear everyone's opinions because we're talking about shooting an endangered animal when we strip away all the other parts of it. So Elizabeth says, endangered animals mean endangered habitats. Our focus should be on conserving both in the least invasive way possible. Beautifully said, It has a lot to do with we needing to re-evaluate our relationship to nature and create and give back nature what we've taken. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more as well, coming up soon. As a matter of fact, just really quickly, to your point, Elizabeth, Sierra and I were looking yesterday, and we found that there has been so much land loss, I believe, for agriculture alone, that in last year they have lost equal to about 8 United Kingdoms worth of environment last year alone. Stacy says, nope, because that endangered animal is already teetering on the edge of extinction, and then add a DART team to the mix. Great point, Stacy. Everybody wants to see the animals thrive, and if zoos are very focused on conservation, number one, why are they breeding them just for ticket sales? But number two, why are killing them their only solution? And if that is the only solution, is it something we should allow to continue? Thanks for joining us today. Always a fascinating topic. Thanks for joining us in about the DART team. Remember, they are not the trained sharpshooters we think they are. They do not have the accuracy rate people think they have. They are not potentially the solution. And it is a surprise that there are guns in all these back rooms at the zoo. You go and you see Disney, and behind it, it's like the Terminator. So very, very important for us to look behind the scenes at what happens at the zoos. Thank you for joining today. A very challenging conversation, a difficult conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say about it. Everybody have a wonderful Thursday. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow